All right, the temple of God. We have been talking about the temple of God for a few weeks here, and we're going to take a different angle on it now. Here's the picture that we have, or the drawn artist's illustration of what the tabernacle in the wilderness might have looked something like that. And we know that it started as a tent, and then David had in his heart to, instead of just having it be a tent, have it be a permanent structure, a temple. His son Solomon built that. It was destroyed, and then the second temple was built, which was called Herod's temple. And it's called the temple, it's called the tabernacle, it's called the sanctuary. It's all the same thing. But there's another temple that we've been talking about in the last few weeks. Let's see if you guys remember. Where is there another temple?
In heaven.
Both
heaven.
Answers are right.
In our heart,
In our heart and in heaven.
In heaven, there's this is just a model of the real one in heaven, but then there's also a temple here on earth today, which is
in our
the
heart.
church.
The church.
It's us, individuals and collectively as the church, absolutely. So we've been talking about the cleansing of the sanctuary. Let's read this verse again, because it's just such a powerful and profound verse. And I'll tell you, this is a verse and a subject that is rarely studied in Christendom. To be honest, most churches just don't even try on Daniel chapter 8.
The other temple is, I think, Sabbath.
Oh, you're talking about a temple in time. Yeah. The Sabbath is like a temple in time. That's another good point. Yeah, sanctuary in time. There's a beautiful song called "Sanctuary in Time" about the Sabbath. That's a good point too. So Daniel 8:14.
Why I'm talking about, Daniel chapter 8:14 is without the concern about the Sabbath, there is no answer still.
Without the what on the Sabbath?
The Sabbath, during the dark age, we lose the Sabbath too.
That's
but,
true.
1844, 1848 actually, we got to restore the Sabbath. That's why, should be explain about the Sabbath when we talking about Daniel chapter 8.
You're right. On the subject of Daniel 8 and the truths that were lost during the Dark Ages. That was one of the main truths. Was the Ten Commandments were distorted during the Dark Ages. Definitely true. So the verse is Daniel 8:14, and he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, and then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. The sanctuary will be cleansed. So we again expect this cleansing movement toward the end of time. And what is the sanctuary? Well, there's many of them. There is the one on earth that was destroyed. There's the real one in heaven. And then there is the temple that is each one of us. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16. This is New Testament now. So the New Testament explains the Old Testament. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16. Can somebody read that for us, please?
Do you not know that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you?
So you are the temple of God. And I mentioned this, I think on the first day when we studied overview of Revelation, the idea of the tabernacle itself and the way it was built, it kind of has some similarities to the body, to the human body, and also spiritual lessons. So there was on the outside, if you looked at it, the outermost layer of it was animal skins. And it didn't look very attractive on the outside. But on the inside, the curtains were to look like gold embroidered on the curtains. And so, and then you had golden jewelry, these lampstands, and it was made out of gold, and the Ark of the Covenant was made out of gold. So the treasure was on the inside, but then the outside was normal. And that's supposed to be like us, right? The treasure is supposed to be inside us, right? And then what dwelled inside the temple was, at the most holy place, was God's throne. Just as there is to be, God is to live enthroned in our hearts, right?
Verse 17 goes on, it says,
Yes.
if anyone defiles the temple of God, God will destroy him. For the temple of God is holy, which temple you are.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, that's strong stuff.
That's strong stuff.
Very
I was-
strong
I
stuff.
was going to say that verse till later on,
Oh,
but,
sorry.
but you went right for it.
I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
You're fine. No, it's good. I'm glad you brought it up. It is serious. Paul is saying, I mean, when you think of the idea, think in the concept of being a Jew, right? When Paul says you're the temple of God, when we think of it, we're thinking, oh yeah, temple of God, that's cool, God lives in us. But in those days, they're thinking, the temple of God, that's holy. You don't bring any unbelievers to the temple of God. You don't, nothing unclean goes there. That is a sacred place. And God is saying, that's you. So don't defile it. It becomes more powerful when you think in the idea of how the Jews thought of the temple as something special and holy. But yeah, so good stuff. Stay in 1 Corinthians, go to chapter 6 and verse 19, same idea. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19 and 20. Same idea. Paul repeats this.
Don't you realize that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who lives in you and was given to you by God? You do not belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price, so you must honor God with your body.
Does anyone have a different wording for honoring
Yeah.
God?
I have,
Glorified.
Glorify God.
I have here,
I
or
think this chapter 6 and 3 is a different, perspective.
Perspective?
Yeah, perspective. Chapter 3 is congregation. Chapter 6 is personality,
Individuals?
individual.
Yeah.
I think.
And both work. Both are true.
Yeah,
Both.
I know.
You could say the temple of God is the church. You could say the temple of God is each individual. Absolutely. You were going to say, Sam?
yeah, I had a different wording. Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own? For you were bought at a price, therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's.
Amen.
Amen.
It's interesting to think of ourselves as not ourselves. We don't own ourselves. Isn't that interesting to think
Well, we've
of?
been purchased at a price.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But we don't like that idea, right? I mean, this is me. I get to do what I want and that's not how it works. This is this body. I mean, when you think about it, this body is just a loner, right?
Amen.
It's just a loner.
Amen.
It's not the body we're going to have for eternity.
It's a tent.
It's a tent.
It's
Yeah.
a tent.
It's a
That's a good point.
temporary structure.
And Paul here is so specific. He's so specific. In
Yes.
the temple of the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
That's what he says here.
Yeah.
Acknowledge that part.
And notice. I want you to notice the wording. He says, "Glorify God
Glorify.
Yeah.
in your body."
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, keep that in mind. We'll go to the next passage here. Now, this is the three angels' messages, which we've discussed before. This is the final warning message to mankind before the second coming. Revelation 13 and 14 is the climax of the book of Revelation. Chapter 13 ends with the mark of the beast. Chapter 14, you see this final warning message, and then right after it, the second coming is depicted around verses 13 and on. So this is the final warning message to mankind, these three angels' messages. And notice the first angel's message. This is Revelation chapter 14. I'll read verse 6 and 7. It says, "And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel, to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation, and kindred, and tongue, and people." Now we know this is symbolic, because it is not angels who preach the message, but who has God commissioned to preach the message?
Us.
The disciples.
The church. The church. And so an angel is often used as a symbol for God's people giving the message. The word in Hebrew, the literal word malak, it simply means messenger. And depending on the context, it could refer to what we think of as a winged angel, or it could refer to a prophet. For example, John the Baptist in the book of Malachi is called God's messenger, the Hebrew word malak. It's the same word for angel, same word. So this is a symbol of God's people in the last days giving this message worldwide.
I
Now,
have a
go ahead.
question, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Is this like giving people a last chance?
Mm-hmm.
For the close.
Absolutely. Think about it this way. The mark of the beast issue is coming. The entire world is about to be deceived. Would God not have a people giving a final warning message about this? Absolutely. Absolutely. So he stirs up his people to warn the world. Absolutely. So here's the first angel's message. This is verse 7. Saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him. Does that sound familiar? Give glory to him. What did we just read in 1 Corinthians? We are to
glorify God.
glorify God in your bodies, which is because they're not your own. Interesting, right? So this first angel's message says, fear God and give glory to him. Why? For the hour of his judgment is come. And worship him who made, and then it quotes the fourth commandment, heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that in them is. Interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so give glory to God. Now, our question is, what is one way to glorify God? Go back to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 31. What is one way that we can glorify God in our bodies? 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31. Can somebody read that for us, please?
Therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the Lord.
Ah, so whether you eat or drink or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. So is it possible to eat and drink to the glory of God?
Yes.
Yes.
If it's possible to eat and drink to the glory of God, then is it possible to eat and drink in a way that would not glorify God?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Interesting. Okay. Let's keep going. Does God care about our physical health?
Yes.
What do you guys think?
I would
Oh,
say
yes.
Sure.
What father does not care about the health of his
That's
children?
exactly it.
Of
Everybody.
course he does.
Absolutely.
But sometimes we think we divorce the idea of spirituality from health, and we compartmentalize spirituality to it's just this thing that you do at church or when you witness to people and when you read your Bible. That's spirituality. But the Jews understood that true religion and true worship of God is done every moment of your life. Every act that you do could be an act of worship. Jesus did not preach publicly until he was 30, but he worshiped God every day in everything that he did. When he was in the carpenter's shop, he was glorifying God. And whether he ate or drank, he did it in a way that glorified God. So does God care about our health? John, the third epistle of John, chapter 1, verse 2. Could somebody read that, please?
This is a holistic, you know. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things,
Mm.
in all things, and be in health, just as your soul prospers.
Now that's interesting. He wants us to prosper and be in health, just even as your soul prospers. So in the same way as your soul is to grow and prosper, I mean spiritually speaking, that our spiritual side, we're supposed to prosper and get better and grow spiritually. In the same way he wants our health to grow and prosper. God cares. And now this was John speaking, but who was speaking through him? God was speaking through him. This is the Holy Spirit. God
Holy Spirit, yeah.
wants us to be healthy. Now, why? Why is it important? Well, in the context of the idea that we are the temple of God, it makes perfect sense that he would want his temple to be in good working order, right?
Mhm.
Because that's his temple. But there's some practical reasons for this. Go to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. And what you'll see here is that, as we go along here, is that the gospel message is a holistic message that should affect every aspect of our lives for the better. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Can somebody read that, please?
Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect.
Ah. Yeah, that's very clear. You have a new living, right? It's a paraphrase, and I love it. It's very clear. The King James says here, a little different, says, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so when we're converted in our minds. God converts our mind. It's our fingers don't change, right? Our toes don't change. Right? How does God speak to you when he speaks to you?
Your mind.
Through the mind.
In the mind.
That's the communication tool. That is, in essence, that's the most holy place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where God dwells. And so the mind should be clear and healthy to keep those channels of communication open. That's the idea. Alert, right?
Alert.
Go to Isaiah chapter 30. Isaiah chapter 30, verse 21. Isaiah chapter 30, verse 21. Can somebody read that?
This is very good.
Okay. Whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you, saying, "This is the way, walk in it."
Ah. So the idea is that we want to keep those channels of communication open and the mind clear. Have you ever been sick and not feeling good? Or maybe you ate something that made you not feel good and your mind feels foggy?
When you're tired.
Or when you're really tired, right? And the idea is that if you're unhealthy or if you're in a state of whether overwork or something like that, the mind is not as clear and you're just a little foggy, right? And not that God can't speak to you at those times, but maybe your mind's not working quite as good as it normally would, right? And that's the idea, to keep that temple in good working order so that we can have that clear communication channel with the Lord. And here's a article that I found. This is off of, what website did I get this off of again? Oh, it's on the top, WebMD. You can't see it there, I can see it, it cuts off the top. It's WebMD, and the idea, and I could have quoted from dozens of articles online, this is well established here in the 21st century, that the health of the body affects the brain and the health of the mind. And so in the article they talk about the idea of how people think, well, to avoid Alzheimer's and dementia when you get older, you play mind games and stuff to keep the mind active, right? And that's good. But they said another thing, here's a quote from it, but a healthy body is also key to maintaining a healthy brain. And that's something that many people tend to overlook, experts say. So if the body is healthy, the brain will be healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes sense. The brain is really kind of dependent on the body, right?
Yeah.
If the blood is circulating well, then that blood's going to the brain well. And if it's healthy, clean blood, then that's what the brain's getting, full of oxygen and all that. So a healthy body means a healthy mind.
1/3.
I saw once, I can't remember where it was, it must have been on the internet or where, but they said that, and I think of it as God gives us clues on what to eat, because they say if you crack open a walnut, it looks like a
Oh.
brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And walnuts are good for the brain, or a
Yeah.
carrot, if you cut it, it looks like an eye,
Like
and
an
carrots
eye.
are
I've
good
heard
for
of
the
that,
eye.
yeah. And then
So-
grapes look like blood vessels.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And what is? Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But-
it is kind of neat.
Because I truly believe in holistic medicine, because I think God gave us all these herbs and other things to, give to us. I mean, certainly I believe in doctors,
Yeah.
because there's some things where you just need a doctor.
Uh,
But I mean, for a cleansing or anything like that, you don't need this over-the-counter stuff. You
I
just-
hear you.
you know.
I hear you.
So God gave this to us, and He
Yes.
gave us clues on what to eat, and that's how we keep our
There's
Mine's
healthy
healthy.
stuff out there
Yeah.
in nature for us.
Yes.
Absolutely, there's blessings in the plants and out there for us. Absolutely, absolutely. So another question: why is it good to have this temple in good working order? Why is it good to be healthy? Well, another reason why is for service. And again, not that there's people who have physical ailments or they're born handicapped or something like that. And it's not that they can't serve, but if because of your own choice, you handicap yourself, it's going to make it so you can't serve others as well. Whereas if you make wise choices with the stewardship with the body that God has given you, then you are able to serve better. And here's the picture I have. Is of these young kids picking up trash, and there is nothing that adults love more than seeing young kids doing things like that, right? Isn't that the best? These kids are the best. When you see kids do anything or opening up a door for an old lady or something like that, you just love that. Here's these kids picking up trash, and that's the idea: is that we are to be servants to humanity, and if our equipment is working better, we can serve better. That's the simple idea. And I have here the story of the parable of the talents. And we don't have to read the whole thing. I'm sure you guys are familiar with it. But it's good to keep the lesson in mind, right? And you know the idea that the parable basically was that a ruler gives out a measure of
They're done.
talents, which was a word meant to describe a certain amount of money back then. But it seems that we have adopted the word, and today when you say a talent, you're talking about anything that's a gift that somebody's born with, right? Whether it's writing or speaking, or I don't know, people have talents in athletics and singing and all these different types of things, right? That's what we think of as talents, God-given talents, right? But in the parable, each man is given a amount of money. And then the ruler leaves, and when he comes back, he expects that each one took what they were given and improved on it and made it better. And then gave him back what he had originally and also more, because they improved on it. And there was one guy who's afraid what God's going to do to him, or what the ruler in the story was going to do to him, and so he hid his talent and he didn't use it, didn't improve upon it. And in the story, I mean, we could read the end of it here. It's kind of it ends pretty dramatically. Matthew chapter 25. It's from verse 14 to verse 30, and it's interesting to note that the context here, Matthew 25, the context is all the last days. That's very interesting to know. Matthew 24 is Jesus' sermon on the signs. And chapter 25 is all parables about the last days. The parable of the 10 virgins, and it's all about the last days. So he ends the story with verse 26. His Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers. And then at my coming, that will be the second coming, right? And then at my coming, I should have received mine own with usury, or with interest. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. For unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he that has shall have an abundance. But unto him that shall not, or that hath not, shall be taken away even that which he has. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's pretty strong language, right?
It is.
That's grim.
Now, are we given talents?
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Are we given an amazing body?
Yes.
I mean, the human body is incredible what it does. Now, what if we, in the story, the guy who's the worst just hides his talent, doesn't use it. What if he was to spend it and waste it? And then the guy comes back and he's, where's the money I had? And he, well, here's a piece of it. I don't have much left. I mean, how much worse would that? And think of kind of how we do that to our bodies sometimes, right? Or we not only don't keep it in good shape, but we make it worse, right? And God wants us to make it better, all right? So that's the idea. Now, you may ask, does God really care about this stuff? Does he really care this much about our health? Is this really a big deal?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Is this really a big deal? Well, let me give you a few examples. This is interesting. These are kind of patterns that you'll see in the Bible that God does repeatedly. God's pattern. What was the first test of the Israelites when they came out from bondage in Egypt? You guys remember what their first test was?
Their first test.
This is Exodus chapter 16. This is just after they came out of Egypt, out of slavery, and God tested them. And notice what his first test is. Go with me to Exodus chapter 16, verse 3 and 4. Exodus 16, verse 3 and 4. This is even before Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is not until chapter 20. This is before then. Somebody read that for us, please. I wrote Exodus twice on there. So.
And the children of Israel said to them, Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger.
Stop there, we'll read verse 4 in a second, but question, do you think that they were hungry when they said that?
No,
Mm-mm.
they have food.
Why not?
Because they took all the spoils of Egypt, so they must have taken food.
It's been a little bit of time. Do you think they might have run out of some of it?
Yeah.
They just left Egypt.
It did take a few days to
Yeah.
get from Egypt to where they were, to cross the Red Sea.
Right before it says the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt.
It's been a month.
Oh, okay.
It's been a month. I think maybe they have run out of some of their provisions.
Yeah.
They're in the desert as opposed to being in Egypt now. I am a little speculation. They might have been running out of a little bit of food.
Okay.
God might have waited and let them get a little bit hungry to see how they would have responded. And what's their response is, oh, that God left us in Egypt. We'd rather be back in bondage where we had all the different foods that we wanted, right? You're going to kill this whole assembly with hunger.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right? Verse 4. Then God answers. He already knows, but he knows they need food. He knows before you ask. But he lets them get a little hungry and see how they're going to respond. Verse 4. Somebody read that for us, please, Sam.
Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. And it shall be on the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily.
Okay, so
Sabbath.
it's a Sabbath, right? So notice that the first test, he says, I will prove them, I will test them in verse 4.
Okay.
The first test of the children of Israel when they came out of Egypt had to do with diet. Do you see that? And they are craving what they had in Egypt, and instead God does he say, I will bring you everything that you had in Egypt and give you all the same food? No.
No.
He put them on a pretty strict diet, right? He doesn't expect that of us today, but what did he put them on? What was their food? Manna.
Oh, what?
It meant, what is it? That's what the word meant. What is it? Manna. And it was bread from
The
heaven.
word manna means what is it?
And
What is this?
that literally is what they ate every day. Can you imagine eating the same thing?
Well,
Every day?
God wanted the health for them. All the mummies that have been excavated and they have been now researched, all of them had basically arteriosclerosis and plaque veins.
This is true.
Yeah.
All of the modern diseases we see in America today, they had all of them in ancient
They really
Egypt.
have it.
They had all of those same diseases back then. And when it got to the end of the 40 years wandering in the wilderness, one of the things that God says to the children of Israel is, there's not a single feeble one among you. No one's sick. Your feet aren't messed up. Your clothes haven't worn away, and you're all healthy. And so it's interesting that he put them on this strict diet of bread from heaven every day, and they complained about it, right? Did they not?
Yes.
They got bored of it. They got bored of it, and they complained, what is this stuff?
It was cornbread.
Right? And they complained, and actually later on in the chapter there's an example like, oh, we missed the flesh pots from Egypt, and so as a punishment, God said, okay, you're going to eat flesh till it's coming out of your nose. And he puts a bunch of quail, brought a bunch of quail, and they ate it literally until they were sick from all the quail. And then people say, oh, well, see, he gave them what they wanted. No, that was a punishment. And then a plague hit them, and thousands were killed.
Yep.
And it was not a good thing. And he didn't do that again. He didn't continually feed them with flesh. It was an object, don't ask again. Man, is what you get. Be happy, right? You're going to eat bread from heaven. Be
They
happy.
despise that angel food
They despise
for devil's cake.
Yeah.
Yes. Ooh, good point.
So, the first test of God's people coming out of Egypt, and this is a pattern, he tests them with diet. Now,
It seems like it's more of a test of both diet and the Sabbath.
it is
at the
both,
same time.
but I'm just, that's kind of the focus.
And wasn't there also in there where they tried to gather more
Yeah,
than they
Oh, yeah.
than what God said? You
Yeah.
know, they tried to gather more and save it, and it all spoiled the next day.
On the seventh day.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was all spoiled.
Absolutely.
In other words, God was saying, "Don't test me."
Yep.
Don't
the way
push
he
me.
said. Yep. And is it the same God today?
Yes.
Oh,
Is God schizophrenic? Did he have a different personality back then?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not the word. It's bipolar. He changes his mind, right? He
No.
has one personality today and then another personality tomorrow. No,
No.
that's not God.
That is
It's the same God.
thing
Yeah.
His
forever.
personality has changed. It's not changed. He's the same yesterday, today, and
And
forever.
forever.
Right?
Amen.
Same God.
Amen.
Okay. So what was Jesus' test?
It was to turn the stones into bread.
Into bread.
It was a test of diet, right? That was his first test. God's pattern, again, he tested Jesus with hunger. Jesus had fasted for 40 days, and then he's tempted to turn the stones into bread by the adversary. Okay? Again, notice how the prophets were trained in the Old Testament. This is a depiction of Samson. I don't know exactly what he looked like, but he was the strongest man alive, and he was able to kill a lion with his bare hands. And notice how Samson was trained. Now this is kind of above and beyond. This wasn't really necessary, a requirement that is given, but it's special for Samson. And I think the reason why is self-control. Go to Judges chapter 13, verse 7. Judges 13, verse 7. Now I'll go ahead and read it for the sake of time. This is Samson's mother. Remember, Samson was a miracle child, and the angel came to him and gave him instructions on how to raise Samson. But he said unto me, Behold, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and now drink no wine, nor strong drink, neither eat any unclean thing, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. Now, don't drink anything from the vine, and eat no unclean things. Was that something that was required of all Israelites back then?
Yes.
No.
Well, not the
This is
wine,
special.
but not
This is
to eat
No,
the unclean
yeah, this is a
things.
special one.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is special. And so the mother is given this special added thing of denying herself of something. And that was for a reason. God didn't just say that for no reason. And that helped with the strength of the child. Isn't that interesting?
Mhm.
That helped with the strength of the child.
Well, if you think about it now, they know that alcohol, when you drink alcohol while you're pregnant, your child can turn out
That's right.
deformed and
Absolutely.
damaged. And
Absolutely.
So it's,
Right.
that's like really amazing science that wasn't found out till recently.
They didn't know that back then,
And
That's right.
but God knew.
But God knew already since the time of Judges
Interesting.
that if you are pregnant, no drink,
Yeah.
no strong drink.
Again, look at the pattern. Here's another example. This is John the Baptist. Notice how the prophets of God are trained. Luke chapter 1 verse 13. Luke chapter 1 verse 13. And we often think of these physical things as not a big deal. But you see these patterns repeated in the Bible, and there's something about diet that, that affects people's character. Luke chapter 1, verse 13. Let me switch to New King James here. And I'll go ahead and read it again for the sake of time. Luke 1, starting in verse 13. This is John the Baptist's father being spoken to by the angel. But the angel said unto him, Do not be afraid, Zacharias, for your prayer is heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John. And you will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink. He will also be filled with the Holy Spirit, even from his mother's womb. And he will turn the hearts of the children of Israel to the Lord their God. He will also go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. And now also read in Mark chapter 1, verse 6, and we have some more information about John the Baptist. Now John was clothed with camel's hair and with a leather belt around his waist, and he ate locusts and wild honey. So John the Baptist was not supposed to have any alcohol. He was denied of all that. His whole life he wasn't supposed to have it. And he had a very simple diet, apparently. He ate locusts and wild honey. Very simple diet.
But
It
this
seems to
locust
be a
is not
pattern.
animal, right?
Well,
Locust
there's
is-
debate about this. It could be either of two things. You guys ever heard of St. John's bread? That's another word for carob.
For what?
Carob.
Carrot.
A carob
Oh,
pod or
carob,
carrot.
okay.
Yeah, carob seeds, and you can eat the seeds, and it's actually very nutritious and very healthy. And so the word locust could have referred to that, or it could have referred to the actual the insects. Either one were actually very healthy and nutritious. Kind of strange to us today.
I don't
but-
think I'll go around eating grasshoppers.
But it's probably, right, it's probably more likely that it was actually the carob, because how often do you get locusts could come and go, right?
Yeah.
You know, you have a bunch of them and then you don't have any, so it's probably likely that he ate carob. Okay, so he has this strict diet. Another of God's pattern. What was Adam and Eve tested on?
Food.
Food. That was the test in the Garden of Eden, was it not?
Mhm.
What were Adam and Eve tested on? They were told not to eat of the tree of garden. Now, why did Eve fail the test?
Disobedience.
Why did she fail the test? Well, what was one of the reasons why she decided to eat what she was told not to eat?
It look good.
It says
It
here in
looks
Genesis
good.
3:6, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food,
Yes.
it looked tasty.
She was in time.
Listen to the guys.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So we see this pattern of God testing people with food. And we often think today this is not a big deal, but it seems like it's a repeated pattern in the Bible. And I could give more examples, but it's interesting, right? Okay. So does God care what we eat?
Yes.
And we saw that already. Whether you eat or drink, this is 1 Corinthians 10:31, whether you eat or drink or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God. Now, does God just make up rules on what we should eat and drink just to deprive us?
No.
No,
Is that why he does these things?
No.
no.
No. What is the reason why? Go to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 24. Deuteronomy 6, verse 24. Let me read that for us, please.
And the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God, for our good always, that he might preserve us alive, as it is at this day.
So why does he want us to obey him?
For our
For
good,
our good.
to preserve us alive.
To preserve
Yes.
us alive. That's the whole point of it. All of God, the commandments of God are not grievous. They're meant to be a blessing, right?
Yes.
That's the whole purpose. Now, I have some more slides on this subject, and I can't believe it's already been 40 minutes since we. So, what I'm wondering is, should we break this up into 2 parts, or do you guys want to go a little bit longer? What do you guys want to do? Up to you.
Go further.
Go further.
Just keep
Yeah.
going.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. We'll try and go through the rest of it kind of quickly. I don't know why I went so
It's good.
long.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Thorough is good.
So how will the world know that we are wise? Go to Deuteronomy. Go back. Yes.
She needs to leave, so.
Yeah, I gotta go.
Maybe-
I'll be
Okay.
back tonight.
maybe we can make
Okay.
it in 2 parts.
We'll record it.
Yeah, yeah.
Record it?
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Bye, Bonnie.
Okay.
Bye,
Dude.
Bonnie.
Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 6. How will the world know that we are wise? Deuteronomy 4, verse 6. Therefore, be careful to observe them, speaking of God's commands and statutes. For this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the people, who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this nation is wise and understanding people. So the idea is that the world will hear about our obedience to God and hear what God has given to us and how we should live, and they will say, surely these people are wise. And it's interesting that God, even though he's the one who gives us the commands, he lets us have the credit for the wisdom in the sight of the people, right? They're going to say, you're wise, but really, is it our wisdom?
No.
No, it's God's wisdom, right? So how will the world know we're wise? By following what's in the Bible. They'll think that we're wise. This is very interesting. So I took a class on principles of public health in college, and one of the things that it mentioned was that all the advances of medical science, modern medical science, there's good stuff, right? I mean, we can keep people alive who've gone through horrible accidents. Somebody can have their hand severed and put back on. I mean, it's crazy what they can do with modern science today. But in this class on principles of public health, they were talking about the majority of lives that are saved today are not because of those amazing medical advances. It's because of simple public health things. For example, basic sanitation, right? You don't leave your waste near where you live, right? You
Yeah.
put that somewhere else, right? you know, like in the old days, they used to just take a slop bucket and throw it out the window into the street.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's like Ben.
That's true.
Not fun, right?
That's right. Right out in
Not
the
healthy
street.
either. That was a really bad idea.
They try to in the river.
It was just right, yeah, where you're washing your clothes and stuff. And then what was the plague caused by? How many thousands and thousands died? And it was a rat infestation, and a large of it was basic public health, you know?
Especially in the cities.
Yeah,
City areas.
absolutely. And I think of the surgeon. I meant to look this up. Maybe somebody else knows the reference, but there was a surgeon, I believe it was during World War. No, it wasn't during one of the World Wars, but it was during a wartime, who advised that people should wash their hands, that the surgeons should wash their hands after dealing with the dead body, in between You know, because back then they would go and they would deal with somebody who had died on the battlefield. They wouldn't wash their hands, deal with the dead body, then go help deliver a child.
Yeah.
And you would have these kids dying
Oh.
or people getting infections, and oh, I wonder why, right? And they didn't have modern germs, and the guy saying wash your, and people back then ridiculed him. Said, you're crazy. What are you talking? You know? But then he let me just prove that, and he did it, and he did it, and it showed that there was less deaths, and they started saying, well, maybe we should listen to this. Basic public health stuff is what I'm talking about. Has saved untold amount of lives, and the bulk of people who live longer today in modern civilization do so because of these basic things. Now, these basic principles were in the Old Testament, were they not?
Yes.
You were to wash your hands. If you touched a dead body, wash your hands. You touch a dead corpse, wash your hands, right? What did God say about what they should do with their waste? Take it outside the camp, bury it, right? That was thousands of years ago.
Oh.
Yeah.
And yet, just a few hundred years ago, there was people not practicing that in more modern civilization, right? And dealing with the consequences.
A lot of death.
So this shows the wisdom of the Bible. And it's not like all the other nations did this. This was special for Israel. Give you another example. In World War II, when you had pilots, the Air Force, flying over the Pacific, they would often get shot down and they would be stuck in the ocean. And you couldn't often pick them up right away. Maybe it would take a day or two to come get them. And so they would have to survive out there floating in the water until somebody got them. And what do you eat when you're in the middle of the ocean? And the soldiers often did not know what's poisonous and what isn't poisonous to eat. So the military did a study on this to find out what can we recommend that the soldiers eat. They found out that the simplest way and safest way to tell the soldiers what they could and could not eat was to look for two things in the animals. If it has fins and scales, you're safe to eat it. If it doesn't have that, maybe not. You may not want to risk it. So go with those two things, fins and scales. Interestingly, that's the exact same thing it said in the Old Testament.
Leviticus today.
In Leviticus, it says, if you want to know what you can eat in the ocean, look for two things, fins and scales.
Wow.
Now, not only is it incredible that God knew that way back then, in this ancient society in Israel, where nowadays scholars are, we don't even believe the Israelites could read. They knew some stuff that we were barely figuring out a few hundred years ago, right? Not only did they have that information, but think of how incredible God is to put it as a physical characteristic on the animal that's easily identifiable. Fins and scales. You can just see it with your eyes, right? You can see if a fish has fins and scales, and you can say, oh, that one's safe. How incredible is that? What are the chances that it would just randomly evolve like that, right? That those would be the healthy animals. That doesn't make any sense. That's design. Isn't that incredible?
That's great.
So let's look at some of these wise principles that even today are wise in the Bible. Now, we're not going to read these whole chapters. When you get home, read them yourself. It's in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14. We're not going to read the whole chapters, but we'll look at, I put this on here twice, but we'll look at a few of the verses. Now, before we do, someone may ask, but weren't these rules just for the Israelites? These Leviticus rules on diet? And I would respond by saying, are these rules or is it wisdom? I think it's the wrong way to look at it. This is meant to be a blessing, not meant to be, I'm just going to deprive you of something that's great. No, it's meant to be a blessing so you don't hurt yourself. That's the idea. So, were they just for Israel?
No.
Actually, no. The idea of clean and unclean animals was given way back in Noah's day. Did you know that? Question, how many animals were taken onto the ark, in Noah's ark? How many of each animal?
Two.
That's what you ask most school children, and they'll say, yeah, 2 by 2, right? But there's a detail in the story people miss. It's actually not 2 by 2. Did you know that? Go to Genesis chapter 7, verse 2. Now I'm moving kind of quickly for time here. Genesis chapter 7, verse 2. You shall take with you 7 each. Can you close that door? Thank you. You shall take with you 7 each of every clean animal. 7 of every clean animal. Did you see that?
Oh.
A male and his female. 2 of each animals that are unclean. A male and his female. So you had 7 of the clean ones and only 2 of the unclean. Now why do you think that is? Why do you need to have 7 of the clean ones?
You needed something to eat.
Yeah.
Because you were going to eat them. And if you only had a pair and you ate one of them, guess what? There's no more of
You're in
that.
trouble.
There's no more, right? But you only needed 2 of the unclean because you weren't going to eat them.
Yes.
So it's no problem if you only have 2 because they can have kids and now you've preserved that species. You see that? Isn't that interesting? Now Noah was a Jew, right?
Jew, yeah.
He was an Israelite, right?
No.
No.
No, Jews didn't exist back then. This was before Israel existed, right? So was this a rule just for the Jews?
No.
This was wisdom given way back in Noah's day.
That is before the Israelites.
Before the Israelites, even hundreds of years before the children of Israel. This is before Abraham. Isn't this interesting? Okay, so it's not just something for the Jews. So let's look at some of these principles. First one, we already saw this. This is the animal should have fins and scales if it's in the ocean. Leviticus.
Wait, 1 second. So that
Go
means
ahead.
that Noah was instructed on what clean and unclean was. It's just not written down in the Bible.
Yes. Absolutely. Noah knew. Obviously he knew.
Yeah.
But it was codified and it was written down clearly in Moses' days because they'd forgotten by then. They'd been in bondage in Egypt for 400 years.
Okay.
So, Leviticus chapter 11, and this is where it's clearly recorded what it is. What is clean and unclean? Leviticus 11, verse 9 through 12. We won't read the whole thing, but you see the idea in verse 9. These ye may eat of all that are in the water. Whatever is in the water has fins and scales. Whether in the seas or the rivers, you may eat it. And he goes on to say, if it doesn't, it's an abomination to you. Incredible that you could simply look at the animal and see whether it's clean or unclean. Isn't that interesting?
I will only eat tilapia.
Fins and scales, right?
Yeah.
Fins and scales. Now, there's examples of things that live in the ocean that don't have fins and scales, that I've eaten in the past, that I won't eat anymore. And there's a reason why they are not healthy. I'll give you an example. I used to enjoy clam chowder, right? Do clams have fins and scales?
No.
No.
No, they don't. Now, what is the purpose of a clam? I've seen a visual representation where they took 2 fish tanks with dirty, cloudy water you couldn't see through. They put clams in one, and the other one they didn't put clams in. And they waited a few hours, and after a few hours, the one with clams, the water was clear.
Oh.
Because they
You
ate
know
all the
why?
dirt.
Because they filter the water. That's their job. And if you ask anybody who does fishing or the cruise ship boats, they'll tell you when they open the waste ducts to let the waste out of the boats, that's when the critters come who eat those things.
Ew.
And there's certain animals, that's their job. They're scavengers, they eat poop, they're filters, right? And that would be all those other animals that don't have fins.
And so when you eat it, you are also filtering what they filtered?
You get the toxins. That's why it's not healthy. So this is wisdom. God doesn't want you to hurt yourself. So, hate to burst your bubble, but I used to enjoy this stuff too. Things like lobsters,
Shrimp.
shrimp, crawfish,
Scallops.
Scallops.
catfish. Those things,
Catfish.
their job, they are put on this earth
They're on the
to
bottom.
be our garbage disposals.
So
That's
they're
their job.
garbage disposal.
They do their job admirably. But you're not supposed to eat the garbage disposal because you get the garbage when you do it, right?
That's why we're having heart attack and everything.
You
It
get
clogs all
problems
the
when you eat it, right?
veins.
Well, the shrimp has a lot of cholesterol in it.
It's pure cholesterol. The lobster, the whole thing, it's just almost pure cholesterol.
Yeah, man.
It's not the healthiest thing for you. I'm just going to put that out there. So that's their job. And those animals do their job wisely, but God is wise enough to tell us, hey, that's not healthy for you.
It's not just the cholesterol, it's the toxins too.
The
And
toxins.
haven't they proven that when you eat the toxins, it actually doubles in you.
Good point. Okay, so this is, have you guys heard of like mercury poison? And there's like,
Yes.
you need to be careful of the fish because there's toxins in there. And then as you go up the food chain,
That's why seagulls are really dirty.
yes. So the first animal that eats the vegetarian animal at the bottom, they're healthier. The predator who eats that animal is going to have more toxins, and it's exponentially more
Oh, yeah.
toxins.
It goes-
The animal who eats the animal who ate the animal,
Yeah,
the toxins get higher and higher and higher as you go up the food
that
chain.
makes sense.
So.
This is perfectly logical. Now, if you add on top of that, that the animal is eating poop and, and dead things, right? Like lobsters do, they eat dead stuff, right, It's not healthy meat. The levels of toxicity in their meat is very high.
Oh, look at swine. Look at pigs.
That's
Yeah.
our next subject.
That's the
Yeah.
next
That's the next one,
It's
right?
one of the main foods we have, and
Pork,
those are
yeah.
scavengers.
That's
They'll eat anything.
They are
Eat all the garbage.
very good garbage disposals.
Absolutely.
They are fantastic garbage disposals. Any farmer back in the day knew you gotta have a pig because what do you do with your slop and your extra stuff? The pig will eat it.
The Flintstones do that too.
Yeah.
Right? You guys remember that?
The
He had a
Flintstones.
garbage disposal at the Flintstones and it was just the pig right there
Yeah, and then you put it there.
in the sink.
Come on, Barney.
Right?
Wilma!
So now again, let's look. Leviticus, this is incredible. How can you identify what was healthy and what was unhealthy on the land? Leviticus 11, verse 1 through 7. Simple characteristics that you could see. Verse 1, Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, These are the animals which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. Among the animals, whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves, and chewing the cud, that you may eat. So there's it. 2 characteristics. Not very hard to figure out. It's got to have a split hoof. You see that?
Mhm.
That's a split hoof.
Mm-hmm.
And it needs to chew the cud.
Chew the cud.
You ever seen a cow
Mhm.
just
Yeah,
standing
chewing.
around chewing all day? That's chewing the cud. That's what
true.
they eat, and then they regurgitate, and they eat it again. They regurgitate, and they eat
Oh,
it again.
that's
And they eat it
disgusting.
again. And you know what? It is gross, but I point this out. It's kind of gross, but it's good to realize. Have you seen the difference between horse manure and cow manure?
Yes.
Horse manure, it looks like maybe a tractor just ran over a field and you can still see the grass, right? Cow manure, it's like chocolate pudding or something. You can't even tell what that was, right?
Right.
It is so thoroughly digested,
Yeah.
you can't tell that was grass. The reason why is they chew the cud. They
Yeah.
get all the nutrients out of it. All the good stuff, they're getting out of it. That's why it has to chew the cud. Horses, on the other hand, don't. And what does a horse hoof look like?
It's not cleft.
Not
cleft in
cleft.
general,
Not
not
cleft.
split. Do we eat horse?
No.
No, we
No.
don't. That's why. That's why horses do not have a good digestive system, so the meat's not as healthy. So when you tell an American, hey, you want a horse burger, right? Because we have adopted in some ways, not all, in some ways, the culture of Judeo-Christianity, which was from the Bible. But you go to some of these other countries, and horses on the menu, no problem, right? Mello knows, she's from the Philippines, and I've heard in the Philippines the idea is if one guy eats it and he doesn't die, you can eat it, right? That's the idea.
Including snakes.
But it's not the healthiest way to live. It's not the healthiest way to live. So we talked about
Ugh,
pigs, right?
that's
Pork meat.
ridiculous.
This is kind of gross. I hate to, but
Oh, ugh.
it's true. That's pork meat, and do you know what those little... That's
Trichinosis.
trichinosis. And pigs are known for having those diseases in them. It's scary stuff. That stuff can go in your brain, and you can get worms in your brain. And I've heard of, there's many cases where doctors will go...
Insulinus.
Yeah,
You know a guy who
insulinus.
used to do MRIs or some sort of scan?
He was a
or
doctor,
something?
yeah.
He said he had cases of worms in brains like every 2 months, a worm in someone's brain like every 2 months.
Wow.
And they
Well,
would
Yeah.
think it's a tumor, or they have a headache,
Yeah, but it's
and then they
actually
would go in and, no, that's a worm.
Yeah.
there's a lot of pork consumed.
Yeah, because the worm really lives in the pig.
Yeah.
And my sister, who is a nurse, she also gave a health lecture, and that worm is really in the pig, and I think it's a tapeworm, and it goes to you.
No, trichinosis, trichinosis.
Yeah, it's tricky.
It's a kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. So you guys get the idea. Do I need to go into more detail about how unhealthy
No,
this is?
it's
The pigs,
okay.
they don't sweat, they'll eat anything, they'll eat other pigs. I mean, it's not healthy.
You know what's
And they'll
also,
eat humans too.
Yeah,
Yes,
they're humans.
they will, given the chance. You can't move and they're hungry, they'll eat you.
I
Yeah.
also think
Well,
about the intelligence of a pig too. They're very intelligent creatures and like, you know, you think of
Incredibly
chickens that are clean and they're kind of stupid, but pigs, they're really smart, like they're supposed to be kind of a pet to us, so more
It's true.
companion.
There's something about salmon that just looks like food.
Yeah.
It's just dumb. It just, you know, you don't feel bad about it. You see a cat dead on the side of the road and you feel bad. When a fish gets killed, you don't, it's like, it looks like food.
Wait, we can eat cats?
No.
No!
The idea is that
Oh.
cats, you feel bad. when a
They're
cat
cute
dies,
and
right?
cuddly.
Yeah, you don't feel
But
bad.
salmon
when a
aren't
salmon
cute and
is
cuddly,
It
yeah.
just looks stupid. It looks like it was meant to be eaten, right? Pigs are incredibly intelligent. They're like up there with like dolphins. People don't realize how smart they are, and it's meant to be a pet and a garbage disposal. But
But
not on the
don't
menu.
But
Okay.
not both the same time.
Yeah, right. yeah. So we'll move on. And I'm glad you brought up chickens. I didn't go through the sake to go through all the birds. The idea simply on the birds, because they're listed specifically, generally, if it's not a predator or a scavenger, it's health. So turkey and chicken, you know, quail, these are fine.
Oh,
But
good, we
but
can collect things.
you don't want to eat a vulture.
Oh, no,
That's not okay.
No.
Eagles, you don't want to eat eagles.
no.
And
Right.
even the bat.
Any predators, scavengers,
No.
you don't eat those. Okay, so why are they unhealthy? What do all the unclean animals have in common? Well, actually, I just mentioned this. They are almost all of them, are scavengers or predators. That's the reason why they're unhealthy. They don't process their food well. Or, like, take for example a rabbit. A rabbit is a vegetarian, but a rabbit does not digest its food well, does not chew the cud. So since it doesn't get all the nutrients out of its food the first time, do you know what it does? It goes and eats it the second time.
Ugh.
Rabbits will eat their own poop. That's what they do. Now the toxins that were supposed to be taken out of the body now get reintroduced back into the body, and they're in the meat. And so they were specifically mentioned in Leviticus as unclean because the meat's not healthy. It's eating its own feces.
So
They don't-
hare and
Yeah.
rabbits. Hare is also a type of rabbit.
Yes, that's the idea.
But it's interesting because in Leviticus, he doesn't really say the
He
why.
doesn't tell you why.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
It wasn't until modern
Just
science.
trust me, don't eat it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we know why.
Uh-huh.
Now we know exactly why. All the clean animals were all vegetarians that processed their food well. Now why is that important that they were vegetarians? Well, what was God's original diet? What was the diet in the Garden of Eden?
Fruit and vegetables.
Foods, grains, and nuts. So God, essentially it's as if, okay, here's the ideal in paradise, and in heaven this is going to be the ideal again because we won't kill anything. So even lions will be vegetarians in heaven, it says. They'll eat straw like an ox. So that's the ideal, vegetarian. But since the fall, he says, okay, you can eat animals now, but, and you know that it wasn't actually, you weren't allowed even to eat animals until after the flood. Did you know that? That was
Yes.
right after the flood. God tells Noah, now you can eat animals, obviously the clean ones. If you ate the unclean, they
Lifespan
wouldn't exist.
shortened.
And their lifespan shortened, that's true. But the reason why was because the earth was destroyed, all the
No
vegetation was
vegetation.
destroyed. Yeah, they had to. So the ideal diet was vegetarian, but since he allowed them to eat meat, he said, okay, you want to go as close to the source as possible. So if you're not going to eat the plant, eat the animal that eats the plant. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And that gets all the most out of it, so you eat the animals that are vegetarians. But don't eat the animals that eat other animals, because then that's farther away from the ideal, and you get more toxins.
So basically, if we tell if we have children, can we tell them that if they only eat vegetables and fruit, will they grow up to be like 200? Will they?
I think our
The,
bodies are
our
too
genes
degenerate.
have gotten so bad.
Also, no.
But they do live longer,
They
vegetarians.
do live longer.
Yes,
We'll
they
talk
do.
But
about
they
that.
do.
We'll talk
There are
about that.
some 100.
And that's not
something
required.
150.
It's not required to be a vegetarian anymore. But it is the ideal. It is healthier. Yeah. So, why do these things matter? Do these things matter today? Well, has reality mattered? Has reality changed, I mean?
No.
Is it still the same? Are these animals still the
Worse
same?
Mm-hmm.
They're worse
They're still
now.
the same. So if they were unhealthy then, they're probably still not
They're
unhealthy
worse now, the way they factory farm
The way they
them.
factory
Oh,
farm, it's
yeah.
worse.
Now they have cancers growing.
Yeah,
and
it's
stuff.
not a chemical.
And they inject them with those antibiotics, and
Yeah,
it's terrible.
and then even the ones that they say we never use antibiotics, you're worried, like, well, what do you do with it when it's sick?
Yeah.
Just kill it and feed it to you.
Ugh.
That's it's
Yeah.
scary. All right. So does this matter today? Well, we don't have to go through all these verses again. We've already read them, just for the sake of time. Whether you eat or drink or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God, right?
Mhm.
And then we're told this one that ye are bought with a price, you're not your own. Therefore glorify God in your bodies.
Because you are bought with a price.
And then this one was the one that Sandra read earlier that said, if you defile the temple of God, God will destroy you.
Mhm.
That's not my words, that's God's word, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we need to be careful with what God has given us. And think of it this way, this body is a loner, right? We're going to get an eternal one that will last forever. But if we don't take care of the loner, why would God give us an upgrade? You know what I mean? It's kind of as if somebody was to say, hey, let me borrow your car. You know, you're gonna be out of town, let me borrow your car for a little while. They take your car for a week, and they bring it back, and oh man, there's no oil in it. There's all this smoke coming out the tail end. You know, flat tires. It's all scratched up and spray painted on it, right? And he comes back, man, I had a great time with your car. Here's the keys. I'll come back to when you get a new one. Let me know. I'll take the nicer one too, right? Would you let him? Would you
I
go to
wouldn't
the nicer
let
one?
him anymore.
If we don't take care of this loner body, you know, why is God going to give us the better one, right?
Yeah.
And I don't mean to put it in terms of a salvation issue, but at the same time, God is the one who said, if you defile the temple of God, he will destroy you.
Yeah.
So we do need to be careful with the temple that God has given us.
It's almost like it's our responsibility to take care of what God has given us. It would be like God said, here's a garden, take care of it, and we don't, and everything withers and dies.
Exactly.
So we have to do the same with our bodies.
Exactly. All right, we're wrapping up. Just a couple more slides here. Does this matter today? Isaiah 66. Isaiah chapter 66, verse 15 through 17. Notice the context. This is the second coming. So this is clearly in the Christian era after. Now, by the way, friends, the Old Testament laws, you got to be careful because a lot of these things are done away with, right? You don't have to keep the feast days. Circumcision's done away with, right? All the things that have to do with the temple, all that's done away with. But the clean and unclean laws, those predate the days of Moses by hundreds and hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
And so those were principles that were already there. They were just codified in Leviticus, but they were already there back in Noah's day. The question is, do those things stay with us after? Well, let's look here. This is Isaiah 66, and the context here is the second coming. Isaiah 66, verse 15, for behold, the Lord will come with fire, and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and by his sword will the Lord judge all flesh, and the slain of the Lord shall be many. The context is clearly the second coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those who sanctify themselves and purify themselves to go to the gardens after an idol in the midst, eating swine's flesh and the abomination and the mouse shall be consumed together, says the Lord. Now here we have the context is the second coming, and it's talking about consuming and destroying people who are eating swine at the end of time.
Not just anyone though, but because there are gonna be people in heaven who eat pork, obviously.
Yeah, people who don't know
It's the
better.
ones that are consecrating and purifying themselves in a sacred garden.
But he does specifically specify these things are not okay at the end of time, at
Yeah.
the second coming, right? Let me give you more. Acts chapter 15. Acts chapter 15, verse 29. Now, this was after the great debate about circumcision in the church, right? And there was some people saying, oh, we need to keep circumcising, and others who said, like Paul, who said, no, this is not required anymore. And the ones who were arguing that this is not required anymore, it was clear that God was on their side. And it's not required that you circumcise anymore. But after this council, this Jerusalem council, a letter was written by the apostles to the churches to tell them, you don't have to be circumcised anymore. But it did say, hey, these are things that you should notice. Acts chapter 15, starting in verse 28. This is their letter. For it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessary things. Now notice the things that they mention. That you abstain from things offered to idols, from blood, and from things strangled, and from sexual immorality. If you keep yourselves from these things, you will do well. Farewell. Now that's interesting, right? Why those things are mentioned. Now notice it says, keep yourselves from sexual immorality. It doesn't say anything about robbing people. So does that mean you can steal?
Okay, yeah.
No.
No.
So the idea is that it was not meant to be an extensive list. But there's a couple key things that are mentioned that give you hints about what's important. The sexual immorality, that's referring to one of the 10 Commandments, right? But why refer to don't eat blood or things that are strangled? That's referring to the Levitical law about clean and unclean foods.
Yes.
Did you know that? In that law about what's clean and unclean, one of the things that it says is that you are not to eat an animal with blood in it. You're to drain all its blood out. You don't eat the blood because the life is in the blood.
That's right.
And it was they were said you were not to eat anything that's strangled. Don't eat it. Now that's way beyond Moses' scientific understanding. The idea is that if an animal is killed by strangulation, the stress in its
It
body,
goes to you too.
all the chemicals are released, all those
Adrenaline.
stressful chemicals of terror, right, are released in the body. It's killed, the meat is then taken with all those chemicals in it. And then you eat it, you ingest all those stress chemicals of something that was strangled to death. You're not supposed to eat that. Even if it's perfectly good meat otherwise, don't eat it. And so here we see in the New Testament the apostles saying, don't eat things that are strangled, don't eat blood. That's a reference to this Old Testament Levitical laws. And then it also says no sexual immorality. Now you could argue and say, well, some things are left out, right? It doesn't mention the clean and unclean animals. Well, yeah, but it also doesn't mention don't rob people, don't bow down to idols. It doesn't mention a whole bunch of stuff. It's not meant to be.
Gist.
It's giving the gist of a couple things that they know that the Gentiles are going to have to deal with.
These
Things-
are like, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, these are like physical things that we need to abstain from
Mhm.
to keep our bodies clean and holy, right?
And it makes sense because God wants us to prosper healthy. Because
Yes.
if we are not only improve our spiritual, but we also improve our health, because without the healthy living, we
Yes.
cannot even think better, and
The
we
mind
cannot,
isn't as
you
clear.
know, it also affects the spiritual. And by the way, regarding that blood, it's also in Leviticus 17:11, which it
17:11.
says, 17:12, therefore I said unto the children of Israel, no soul of you shall eat blood, neither shall any stranger that sojourneth among you eat blood.
So, unfortunately, that means the medium rare steaks that I used to get back in the day, if
Yeah,
it's
because
dripping
there's some
blood,
blood in it,
you
too.
weren't supposed to eat it. The Old Testament, they would drain the blood out first, you know, and it's just healthier. It's just healthier. A lot of the diseases are transferred by blood. Okay, so we'll end it with this point here. people will ask me, Joshua, because that was New Testament, that was Acts 15. They'll say, what about Peter's vision? Have you guys heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
And people will say, well, Peter's vision,
So that we do not.
that makes it so we can eat anything now, right?
Mhm.
Let's look at it.
Different context.
Let's look at Peter's vision. Now, the idea of the vision, this is Acts chapter 10, was that Peter was hungry. I won't read the whole story to you. Let's go to Acts chapter 10. But Peter was hungry. He's on the top of the roof. He's praying, particularly verses 9 through 20. This is his vision. And he sees a vision where a sheet has all kinds of, what does it say? In verse 12,
All
in
the
it were
unclean
all kinds of four-footed animals, wild beasts, creepy things, and birds of the air. So the idea is it's everything.
Yeah.
It's got all the unclean. And the picture here, the artist depicted, you got snakes, and that's supposed to be a lion there and a horse, right? All these things that you're not supposed to eat. And it's on this sheet, and it's let down from heaven. And a voice came to him, verse 13, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." Now, in the story, right, you can eat anything. Keep going. What's Peter's answer? Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything common or unclean." And it happened the second time. It came back to him and says, "What God has cleansed, you must not call common." And this was done 3 times.
Mhm.
And it was repeated the same way every time. No, don't call it common or unclean. And then it's brought down a second time. "Rise, kill and eat." Peter says, "No, don't call it common or unclean." Now, this is a vision. Bible students, what does a beast symbolize in prophecy?
A nation.
A nation.
Nation.
Interesting.
What are unclean nations? What are the 4 beasts that were used in Daniel?
They're all
They are all
Unclean
unclean.
animals symbolize the different nations of the world. Now, what is Peter's interpretation? You don't have to take my word for it. What does Peter say this means? Now, I'll also point this out. Verse 17 here. "Now while Peter wondered within himself what the vision he had seen meant." So did Peter think that it was literal? No, he's saying, what did this mean? He
That
was
he is
wondering what it
going to
meant.
be to preach with the Gentile.
But I want you to notice that Peter's wondering, what does this mean?
Oh,
He
yeah.
didn't think it was literal, right?
Yeah.
That's verse 17. Okay? While he's wondering this, behold, a bunch of Gentiles came to his house. While he's wondering what it means, right?
Cornelius.
And then he went with them. Now verse 28. Peter tells you what it means. You do not have to guess what it means. "Then he said to them, you know how it is unlawful for a Jewish man to keep company or to go to one of another nation. But God has shown me that I can eat anything." That's what he says.
No.
No.
"But God has shown me that I should not call any man common or
Or
unclean."
unclean.
So in the vision, where he sees unclean animals and God says, don't call what God has cleansed unclean, Peter interprets that. The Apostle Peter tells us what it means. God has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. You guys see that?
Yes.
That's the interpretation. So these beasts, just as they do another vision, symbolize the nations. And we are not to call them common or unclean anymore. You can now go to them and preach the gospel. You see
That is
that?
not about
Wow.
the food.
It had nothing to do with it. He never anywhere says, in this chapter or subsequent chapters, says anything about how this has to do anything with food. He consistently says this is what it means. Verse 34, "Then Peter opened his mouth and says, in truth, I perceive that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, whoever fears him and works righteousness,